Chains of Justice, a Wild West tale of freedom. The Texas sun blazed without mercy across the scorched plains. Thomas Reed pulled his mare to a sudden halt, his weathered hands tightening on the reins. Something hung from the ancient mesquite tree ahead, something that shouldn't be there. If you want to see how this incredible story unfolds, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. As he drew closer, his blood turned to ice. A woman hung suspended from the massive branch. Her powerful frame stretched taut by thick ropes binding her wrists and ankles. She was Comanche. He could tell from the traditional beadwork still clinging to her torn leather dress. Whip marks crisscrossed her bronzed skin like a map of cruelty. Dried blood traced dark paths down her arms and ribs. Her body trembled with exhaustion, but her eyes, those dark, defiant eyes, remained unbroken. The sound of his horse's hooves made her stir. She opened her eyes, and when she saw him, her cracked lips moved. "Don't look at me," she whispered. Each word a struggle. "Please." Thomas froze. This wasn't just a play, it was a command. The last shred of dignity from a warrior who had lost everything but her pride. He understood, in that instant, she wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of being seen like this, broken, exposed, helpless. Thomas Reed had lived 43 years on this brutal frontier. He'd learned the unwritten rule of survival. Mind your business, keep your head down, and never, ever get involved in matters between settlers and natives. But as he looked at this woman, this human being left to die like an animal, something inside him snapped. He thought of his sister, who'd died giving birth, because no doctor would come to their homestead in time. He thought of all the times he'd turned away from injustice, because it was safer. "Not today. I'm sorry," he said quietly. "But I can't walk away from this." He dismounted and drew his knife. Thomas looked around carefully. No tribal markings nearby. No war party tracks. Only heavy boot prints, white men's boots scattered across the dry earth, like evidence of a crime. This wasn't tribal punishment. This was a manhunt. The woman, he would later learn her name was Naylin, meaning maiden, took a sharp, painful breath. The ropes creaked with each tremor of her tall frame. "Don't," she whispered again, even weaker. "If you cut me down, they'll come for you too." Thomas had heard those words before. His wife had said something similar during a blizzard years ago, when she was dying of fever and begged him not to risk the storm to fetch help. He'd listened then. She'd died that night. He'd lived with that regret ever since. "Not this time," he muttered. He reached up with his knife, a simple tool he used for cutting leather. Nothing more. But as the steel touched the rope, his hand trembled. This wasn't just cutting rope. This was choosing a side. Slice, the first strand frayed. "Hold on," he said, though he wasn't sure she could still hear him. "Just hold on," double quotes snap. The rope broke with a harsh crack. Naylin Falor, the weight of a warrior woman, and Thomas caught her just in time. The impact drove him to his knees, pain shooting up his legs. But he held on. She gasped in his arms, one strong hand clutching his shirt, as if making sure she wouldn't be hanging again. Her body was heavy, not with fat, but with the muscle and bone of someone who'd lived every day fighting to survive. Thomas shielded her face from the harsh sun with his body. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "I'm taking you out of here." Right now, Naylin looked at him. The fire in her eyes had dimmed, but one question remained, clear as crystal. "Are you ready to pay the price for that?" Thomas didn't answer with words. He turned his back to the desert, lifted her in his arms, and started walking toward his horse. He didn't know what the price would be. He only knew that from this moment forward, he'd made his choice. And he'd live or die with it. Naylin woke. As the afternoon sun streamed through the gaps in the wooden shutters, the scent of medicinal herbs mixed with dried wood told her she was alive and somewhere safe. She tried to move. Pain exploded through her arms and ribs. The lash marks still burned, but the ropes were gone. Her wrists were bandaged with clean cloth. When she turned her head, Thomas Reed sat in a worn chair across the small cabin, quietly sharpening his knife. He didn't look at her, didn't ask questions, as if he understood that some stories needed time before they could be told. "You shouldn't have saved me," Naylin said softly. Thomas looked up. Too late for that now. A heavy silence settled between them. Then Nayland took a deep breath, the kind taken by someone who'd learned to live with pain, and began to speak. His name is Harrison Crane. He calls himself a merchant, but he's a slaver. He came to the Red River Territory with forged government documents and false promises. Her voice was steady, controlled. He wanted land with copper deposits. When my people refused to sell, he chose me. Not because I was weak, because I wouldn't submit. She told him about the camp on the edge of the plains, about the beatings that came without reason, about the torn clothing meant to humiliate her spirit, about being left hanging as bait for the sun, not to kill her quickly, but to break her slowly. Thomas listened, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. He'd seen plenty of darkness on the frontier, but this calculated cruelty, disguised as commerce, made his stomach turn. "He'll come back," Nayland said. "And when he finds me here, he'll say, 'You're harboring stolen property. You'll lose everything.'" Thomas stood and walked to an old trunk. He pulled out a stack of papers and placed them on the rough wooden table. "Here," he said. "A copy of a labor contract one of Crane's men dropped near my property line. Forged signatures. Fake government seals. I've seen this kind of thing before." Nayland looked down at the papers, her expression darkening. "He plans to use your laws to chain me. Then we'll use those same laws to destroy him," Thomas replied. Outside, the wind picked up. In the distance, a sound like muffled hoofbeats echoed and then faded. Nolan's head snapped up, warrior instincts sharp. "They're hunting," she said. "We don't have much time." Thomas nodded grimly. "Then we don't run, we fight back." Their eyes met not as savior and saved, but as two people backed into a corner with only one option left: stand and face the storm together. The wind picked up as the sun began its descent. Dust swept across the prairie like a final warning. Thomas was checking the door latch when the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the plains, not rushed, steady. The kind of pace that told him these men weren't just passing through, they were looking for someone. Nayland stood, despite the pain. Her posture was upright, shoulders squared, eyes focused with warrior precision. "3 men," she said quietly. "Not hunters, enforcers." Thomas gripped his rifle tighter. "They know how to find this place." A loud, crude pounding rattled the door. "Reed," a harsh voice barked. "Open up, we just want to talk." Thomas said nothing. He glanced at Nayland. She gave him a firm nod. The door burst open with a violent kick. 2 men stormed inside, druff, dirty, smelling of whiskey and violence. A third stood outside, hand resting on his holstered gun. "Where's the squaw?" the lead man growled, his eyes scanning the small cabin. Thomas stepped forward, placing himself between them and Nayland. "There's no one like that here." The punch came without warning. The man's fist slammed into Thomas's jaw, sending him crashing into the table. His rifle clattered across the floor. The second man lunged, trying to pin Thomas down. Nayland moved, no scream, no hesitation. She spun and threw her entire body weight into the man standing guard outside. He went down hard, his back slamming into the dry ground. Nayland grabbed his wrist and twisted with brutal efficiency. A sharp cry of pain escaped before he could draw his weapon. Inside, Thomas pushed himself up, blood trickling from his mouth. He dove forward, grappling with the first man, fighting for control of the situation. They wrestled across the wooden floor, chairs crashing, the table shifting. Thomas took another blow to the rib, sharp, deep, stealing his breath, but he held on. Nayland turned back inside. A swift, precise strike to the back of the second man's head dropped him like a stone. The last man scrambled up, panic flooding his eyes. He tried to run. Nayland grabbed his collar and yanked him back with terrifying strength. Her eyes were cold as winter steel. "Talk," she commanded. He trembled. "Say, Crane. Crane wants you back. Said if we don't bring you, he'll burn this place to the ground." Thomas stood beside her, breathing hard, holding his bruised ribs. "What else did he say?" The man's voice cracked. "He said, blame it all on the Comanche. Said the town would believe it. Always do. Nayland released him. He collapsed, unconscious before he hit the ground. Outside, the sound of distant hoofbeats faded, but not out of fear. The hunt had found its trail. Nayland turned to Thomas. He'll return. And not just with hired muscle. Thomas looked out at the prairie, now fading into twilight. Then, we don't wait anymore. We take the fight to him. There was no turning back, now. Night fell faster than Thomas expected. The oil lamp on the table flickered with each gust of wind that slipped through cracks in the walls. The 3 attackers were tied up outside near the barn. But Thomas knew they were just the beginning. Nayland sat upright in a wooden chair, fresh blood seeping through the bandage on her arm. She didn't complain. She only stared out into the darkness beyond the window, where the prairie swallowed every trace of movement. Crane will use the law, she said quietly. He doesn't need guns, just signatures and witnesses willing to lie. Thomas nodded. He'll say your property. That I'm harboring you illegally. He'll have me arrested, take you back, and no one will stop him. Nayland turned to face him. Her gaze didn't plead, it held the clear-eyed steadiness of someone who'd survived too long on the edge of death to fear it now. Then you'll lose everything, she said. Your home. Your freedom. Maybe your life. Thomas stood and walked to the old chest in the corner, the one that held his most precious documents. He opened it, rummaging through yellowed papers he hadn't touched since his wife died. Land deeds, birth certificates, and at the very bottom, a blank marriage license he'd been carrying for years, unable to throw away. He laid it on the table. There's a way, Thomas said slowly. Not pretty, not easy, but legal. Nayland looked at the paper. Silence settled between them like dust after a storm. The lamp hissed softly. Go on, she said. We marry. Right now, under territorial law, Thomas met her eyes directly. After that, no one can legally call you property. No one has the right to take you away. You'd be a citizen through marriage. Nayland didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her hands that had once held weapons, fought back invaders, and been bound in rope meant to break her spirit. She thought of her tribe, of honor, of the scars still burning on her skin. What if I say no? She asked. Then I'll still help you run, Thomas replied without hesitation. But they'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. This way, you have the law on your side for once. Outside, an owl cried low, and alone in the darkness. Nayland raised her head. This isn't love, she said. Thomas didn't flinch. No. This is survival. This is freedom. Another pause. Then Nayland stood, her tall frame casting a long shadow over the blank marriage certificate. Freedom means choosing, she said firmly, and I choose never to wear chains again. She picked up the pen. Thomas signed first, his handwriting firm, though his hand trembled slightly. Nayland signed next her name, clean and decisive in letters. She'd learned from a missionary years ago. They looked at each other. There was no kiss, no romantic words, only an agreement between two people pushed to their absolute limits, and a fragile hope that come morning, this signature would stand strong against whatever violence came with the dawn. Thomas folded the paper carefully. We leave at first light. Head to town and register this before Crane can make his move. Nayland nodded. And if they block the road? Thomas looked at the rifle hanging on the wall. Then we keep walking, but not with our heads bowed. Dawn scratched a thin, pale line across the horizon as Thomas and Nayland left the homestead. The wagon rolled slowly through mist-covered prairie, with 3 bound enforcers in the backmouths gagged, eyes wide with the fear of men who'd just realized they'd picked the wrong fight. Thomas held the reins. Eyes locked on the road toward San Angelo. He knew if Harrison Crane planned an ambush, it would be at Eagles Pass, where the road narrowed, between 2 rocky hills like a bottleneck, and he was right. 2 riders emerged from behind a cluster of prickly pear cactus. Dark coats, shiny tin badges glinting in the early light, town lawmen or men pretending to be. One raised his hand in a signal to stop. Routine check, he called out. Voice flat and official. But his eyes flicked quickly to Nayland. "We got word there's a Comanche fugitive in the area. Escaped property." Thomas kept his voice calm and even. "We're bringing witnesses to town." "Legal business." The man gave a dry, humorless laugh. "Witnesses. Or merchandise." Nellen climbed down from the wagon with deliberate slowness. Her tall frame made the narrow pass feel suddenly smaller, more tense. "I'm his wife," she said, voice clear and strong. "By law." The lawman glanced at Thomas, then signaled. Another man appeared from behind them, hand resting on his holster in an unmistakable threat. "Papers," the first man demanded. Thomas handed over the marriage certificate. The lawman looked it over with exaggerated care, frowned deeply, then deliberately dropped it to the ground. "This paper means nothing if there's a prior claim," he said coldly. "Mr. Crane has documentation showing the shove came without warning." Nayland was pushed backward a half step. Thomas stepped forward instantly, placing himself between her and the threat. "That's enough," he said, voice hard as iron. A rifle butt struck Thomas in the side. He staggered, but stayed on his feet, refusing to go down. "You're obstructing officers of the law," the man sneered. Then a sound rose from the hilltop, not loud, but unmistakable to anyone who'd lived on the frontier, the kind of sound that meant whoever was coming wasn't alone. From the ridge, figures appeared on horseback. No rifles raised, no war cries, just Comanche warriors riding in a silent, disciplined line. The wind carried the sound of bone ornaments clicking together and the scent of tanned leather. The lawman swallowed hard. "Call for backup," he muttered to his partner. Nayland lifted her head. "We're not here for war," she said clearly. "We're here for justice." One of the warriors, an older man with gray in his long hair, rode forward and planted his lance into the ground. A clear signal: protection, not attack. Thomas bent down, picked up the marriage certificate, and carefully brushed the dust from it. "We're moving on," he said firmly. "If anyone wants to stop us, do it in front of these witnesses." A long, tense silence followed. Finally, the fake lawman stepped back. The path opened not from kindness, but from fear of what would happen if blood was shed here with so many watching. The wagon rolled forward. Thomas didn't look back. Nallin walked beside him, shoulder to shoulder. For the first time since leaving the homestead, she exhaled quiet and steady, but they both knew the real confrontation was still ahead. The town was waiting, and so was Harrison Crane. The town square of San Angelo was packed when the wagon rolled to a stop. Rumors had spread faster than wildfire about a rancher who dared protect a Comanche woman, about the men tied up in the wagon bed, about a marriage certificate signed in the dead of night. Curious eyes, suspicious stares, and angry glances all turned toward Thomas Reed and Nayland. Then Harrison Crane appeared. He stepped out from the land office porch, coat neatly pressed, boots polished, smile thin as a knife blade. He was handsome in a cruel weather kind of man who'd learned to use charm as a weapon. "I'm here to reclaim my property," he announced loudly, making sure the entire square could hear. "According to legal documentation, that woman belongs to me under a labor contract signed by her tribal chief." Thomas didn't argue. Instead, he gestured. The two conscious enforcers were dragged forward, filthy, bruised, terrified. One of them opened his mouth, voice cracking with fear. Fake papers. Forged seals. The hanging order came from Crane, not any court. The crowd stirred a low murmur of shock and confusion. Crane's smile faltered for just a heartbeat, then returned. "The word of criminals in chains is worth nothing," he said smoothly. Nayland stepped forward. Her presence alone silenced the murmuring crowd. "Then let the law speak," she said slowly, deliberately. "I was never anyone's property. I was kidnapped, tortured, left to die. And this man," she gestured to Thomas, "saved my life when no one else would." Thomas held up the marriage certificate. "By territorial law, she is my legal wife. No one has the right to call her property. Not him, not anyone." Crane's face darkened. His eyes darted toward the sheriff standing nearby. But the lawman, a weathered older man named Buck Henderson, was looking at the enforcers with growing suspicion. Another enforcer suddenly broke down, pointing at Crane with a shaking hand. He made us frame the Comanche for ranch burnings. He paid deputies to look the other way. He said no one would care about one Indian woman. The crowd's murmur grew louder, shocked, angry. Crane's mask of civility cracked. He turned and bolted. It happened in a single fluid motion. Thomas lunged, cutting him off. The two men collided. No wasted movements, just a hard tackle, a clean knee strike. Crane hit the ground face first, his expensive hat rolling away in the dust. Thomas locked Crane's arms behind his back and held him down. "That's enough," he said, voice low but steady. "You lost." Sheriff Henderson stepped forward, pulling out iron shackles. The click of metal echoed sharply across the suddenly silent square. "Harrison Crane," Henderson said officially, "you're under arrest for kidnapping, assault, fraud, and conspiracy." The crowd gasped, then erupted into a wave of hushed conversations. Nayland stood tall, not defiant, not triumphant, just calm. The kind of calm that comes from someone who has finally reclaimed her name and her dignity. As Crane was led away in chains, someone in the crowd whispered, "Justice came swift today." Thomas stood, brushing dust from his sleeves. He looked at Nayland. She gave him a quiet nod, certain, peaceful. The villain had been caught. Now came whatever would begin after. The afternoon sun softened over San Angelo, as if the town itself needed time to process what had just happened. Harrison Crane was led away in shackles, the sound of his protests fading behind the jailhouse walls. The crowd slowly dispersed, carrying with them a story that would be told for years, about a man who wouldn't bow and a woman who refused to be called property. Nayland stood at the edge of the square, desert wind tossing her long black hair. For the first time in what felt like forever, her shoulders were relaxed. No more ropes, no more predatory stares, only her name, finally spoken with respect. A town official stepped forward, a thin man with spectacles and a ledger book. "According to the sworn testimony and evidence presented, Miss Nayland is hereby declared a free woman. No valid claims remain against her." Nayland nodded once. "No thank you. No bowing. Just acknowledgement." She turned toward the Comanche warriors, still watching from the edge of town. They didn't approach. They simply touched their chests over their hearts, a silent salute of respect. Then they turned their horses and rode away in the same quiet order they'd arrived. Disappearing into the shimmering heat of the prairie, Thomas stood beside Nayland, feeling a strange emptiness now that the fight was over. "You can return to your people," he said quietly. "No one will stop you now. You're free." Nayland looked at him for a long moment. Her gaze no longer carried the desperate fire of survival, nor the gratitude of someone rescued. Just the quiet assessment of a person who now had the power to choose her own path. "I know," she said. "And I choose to stay." They left San Angelo at sunset, the road back to the homestead, stretching out in golden light. No wagon full of prisoners this time, no hoofbeats chasing from behind. Just two people riding side by side, silhouetted against the fading day. When the small ranch house came into view, Thomas pulled his horse to a stop. "The marriage certificate," he said slowly, carefully. "If you want, we could make it real. Or, we could dissolve it now that you're safe. The choice is yours." Nayland placed a hand gently on his arm, stopping him from saying more. "Not because of a piece of paper," she said. "If I stay, it's because I choose to stand beside you as an equal. Not as property saved, not as a debt repaid. As a partner." Thomas nodded, understanding flooding through him. "No big promises," he said. "Just honest living." "Just honest living," she agreed. Night fell softly over the prairie. They built a fire on the porch, and Nayland carefully unwrapped the bandages on her arms. Letting the cool evening breeze touch her healing wounds, Thomas handed her water, then sat across from her. For a long while, neither spoke. They simply existed in the peaceful silencer. Silence that came from safety, not fear. Finally, Nayland broke it, her voice soft but certain. "You saw me at my worst. Broken, helpless, And you didn't turn away. Thomas stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. I only did what was right. Nayland smiled, rare genuine smile that transformed her face. Then let us begin with what is right. The wind swept across the prairie, carrying the scent of sage and earth. The homestead was quiet, not with the silence of isolation, but with the peace of a place where violence had ended and something new had begun. Not salvation, not romance, just respect and choice, and the possibility of building a life based on those foundations. Epilogue. Freedom's price. Months passed. The seasons turned. Thomas and Nayland worked the land together, repairing fences, tending cattle, planting a garden that Nayland filled with herbs her mother had once taught her to grow. Slowly, inevitably, respect became friendship. Friendship became trust. And trust became something deeper, something neither of them named, but both recognized. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold, Nayland spoke quietly. In my tribe, she said, we believe that some debts can never be fully repaid, but we also believe that the greatest honor is to stand beside someone not because you must, but because you choose to. Thomas looked at her. Is that what this is? Honor? No, Nayland said, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. This is something more. This is home. Harrison Crane was tried and sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. His network of forged documents and illegal labor contracts was exposed, freeing dozens of other victims, both native and settlerhood, being trapped in his schemes. The 3 enforcers testified against him in exchange for lighter sentences. They were still guilty, but their testimony helped bring down a system that had operated in the shadows for years. Nayland never returned to her tribe permanently, but she visited often, acting as a bridge between 2 worlds. Her people called her She Who Stands Tall, a name of respect, not pity. Thomas Reed became known as a fair man who'd stood up when it mattered. His ranch prospered, and his name became synonymous with integrity. And the marriage certificate that started as a legal strategy, it remained on the wall of their home. A reminder that sometimes the most important choices are the ones made in desperation, and that freedom isn't given. It's claimed. Years later, when people asked Nayland why she stayed, she always gave the same answer: because someone saw me at my worst and chose to see my humanity instead. That's not something you walk away from. That's something you honor with your life. My dear friends, this story is a reminder that freedom is not about choosing what is easy, it's about choosing what is right. Especially when the price is high. In this harsh land, there were people born without power or privilege, but they had something stronger: conscience. They stood for what was right, not because they were applauded, but because they couldn't turn away. When laws are twisted and violence disguises itself in legal language, it's choices like theirs that keep the world from falling too far into darkness. Freedom begins when people honor each other's dignity and refuse to bow to what is wrong. Through this story, I want to remind you of a past painted in red, dust and blood, a time when the powerful believed they could write the law as they pleased. But today, we live in a world where everyone has the right to be protected, where justice matters, where dignity is not negotiable. What you just heard is an echo of a time long gone, and because of that, we should treasure the present even more. Live with integrity, respect the law, stand up for those who cannot stand for themselves. Above all, I wish you health and happiness. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Type 3 in the comments if this story moved you. Thank you for being part of our community here at Best Wild West Stories. Until next time, remember, we all have the power to choose courage when it matters most.